Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to walk you through how to get started on your Catcher in the Rye essay. The first thing you need to focus on are the 5 stages of grief. Now, remember when we look at denial, which is the not accepting that something has happened, you can also include isolation. So anytime that Holden chooses to isolate himself from others is a good example of his denial/isolation phase. Anger should probably be self-explanatory, but anytime that Holden exhibits anger that seems related to his grief, you can include it. Bargaining is anytime that somebody is trying to make an exchange. So, for instance, if a parent suffers the loss of a child, they may wish that they could change places. In Holden's case, he often tries to rewrite his memories with Allie. He also kind of tries to trade places with Allie a few times. So if you can find those examples, bargaining totally works. Depression is another self-explanatory one, but just be careful because every time that Holden says he's depressed, he doesn't necessarily mean depressed in the way that we would use depressed when we talk about the stages of grief. He normally just means sad. But if you can spot any things that Holden does that exhibit an actual depression, totally valid examples. Acceptance is the question mark, and we will deal with acceptance in its own paragraph, so you do not have to necessarily focus on that in the first part of your thesis, but you will have to find evidence for acceptance or the lack of acceptance as we go forward. As we start out by planning, you really have 3 main steps. First, you want to pick the stages of grief that you can defend the best, meaning the ones that you find the most evidence for. Then you want to decide whether or not you think Holden reaches the acceptance phase. Another way to think about that is if you think Holden finally gets closure about the loss that you're covering. It can either be the loss of Allie or the loss of his childhood. I think the childhood one will be a little bit more difficult, but I think that you could argue it either way. And then you need to put a thesis together using all of that information. The planning process for the entire paper will look as such. First, you'll find all of the evidence that you can possibly use to back up your points. Then you'll decide how you want to organize it. We'll go over that. The acceptance phase, yes, you have to decide whether or not he reaches it, and then you have to find evidence for yes or for no. Then you need to put a thesis together, and we can get started on the body of the essay. The big question that you need to start with is which stages can you best defend? Again, defense involves evidence. You need to have evidence from the story. Imagine someone stood in front of you and said, Holden Caulfield is absolutely not grieving anything. There's no evidence that he's going through the grief stages at all whatsoever. Your response needs to prove that person wrong. And in that way, we're kind of writing argumentatively. So the best way to think about it is how could we prove to that person that Holden is in fact grieving? I know I've already emphasized this once, but please make sure that you are focusing on evidence. And a good reminder as you're looking through evidence is you do not have to use all 5 stages. Yes, acceptance will be its own section. Yes, you will have to prove acceptance one way or the other. But the other 4, you can pick and choose. Which ones can you find the most evidence for? Which ones can you argue the best? Those are the ones you can use. I would not deal with the other ones. I would leave them out. Once you've dealt with the first 4 stages, we can start talking about acceptance. So, do you think that Holden gets closure with the death of Allie? Or do you think he at least starts to get closure? Either way, you're going to have to write a paragraph. So think about it this way. If you think he has reached acceptance, then what's that look like? What is Holden going to start doing? Or what is he going to stop doing because he's reached closure? And show me where that happens in the book. Otherwise, you need to tell me that you don't think that he's reached the acceptance phase. And you need to show me evidence that he's still going through the other phases. Now, to be clear, you can reach the acceptance phase of grief and still go through other phases. So once you've reached acceptance, that doesn't mean that grief is over. You can still get angry again. You can still get sad again. You've just also accepted the loss and you've started to deal with it. So keep that in mind that you can argue it either way, just have a way to prove it. Show me what he's doing or not doing to prove that he has or has not accepted the loss. Once you've found all of this evidence, it's time to make a thesis. And when you think about a thesis, you really need to think about how you're going to organize the paper because the thesis shows your reader how you're going to organize your thoughts. So I think there are 2 very clear ways that you can organize this essay. Obviously, you can come up with others. These are the simplest ways that I can teach. So these are the ones I'm going to cover. You can start chronologically, where you start from the beginning of the book, go all the way to the end, and you point out each stage as he hits them. They don't have to happen in order. The stages of grief almost never do happen in order. So as you're proving it, just show me like he does this major event. That definitely shows me that he's grieving. And it covers this stage. And then you can even give me like other events or other things that he does that kind of match up with that event. Show me a pattern of behavior, perhaps. And then go to the next big event and the next big event. Otherwise, you can organize it by the stages of grief. I don't care what order you put those stages, but whatever order you list them in your thesis is how they should show up in your paper. So don't say that you're going to cover denial, anger, and depression, and then do anger, denial, depression. That's the wrong order. Once you've decided your organization, you can actually put your thesis together. I'm going to suggest that we do a 2-sentence thesis for this paper because you're really answering 2 separate questions as you go. First thing is break down how you're going to prove your point. So keep your organization in mind. Think about the best way that you're going to prove to this person that Holden is grieving and list the stages or the chronological events in the order that you're going to be covering them. Then your next sentence needs to cover the acceptance phase. So your next sentence is really just the answer to the question, does Holden reach that acceptance phase? A really easy way to go about this and to connect it to the previous thesis sentence is to start your sentence off with in the end, because obviously that's where you're going to best know whether or not he's reached acceptance. Now, if you think he has reached acceptance, you could say like fortunately in the end. And if you don't think that he has, you could also say unfortunately in the end. Then whichever way you go at the end, you want to follow up that sentence with a because phrase. So in the end, Holden does reach acceptance because blah, blah, blah. Or in the end, Holden does not reach the acceptance phase because blah, blah, blah. Tell me what I need to know for you to prove that statement to me. So whatever evidence you have as to whether or not he has reached acceptance, I should know it by that point. Now I believe you are ready. You should have a thesis put together. It should probably be about 2 sentences long. And I want you to go back to your thesis builder. So I've returned that to you at this point if you turned it in on time. And if you didn't, you still have it. Go in, go over the pieces that you believe you can prove best, and put a full thesis together on a separate doc that'll be the beginning of your essay. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Be cool to each other. Wash your hands and have a great day.